calling my message today, if you're taking notes, how to live by design and not by default. How to live by design and not by default. And I'm going to take us to just 3 verses in Ephesians that Paul writes, and that's pretty much where we're going to spend our entire day. 3 verses, very simple. And I believe Paul expounds on these principles of how to seek God first, but also how to value time as we aim to look more like Jesus every single day. So we're going to be Ephesians 5, 15 through 17. I'm going to read all of it right now. It says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." And he starts out with a fairly, I think, obvious command to be very careful how you live. And I say it's obvious because I think all of us would desire that we're careful with our decision making and that we're wise with our decision making. I don't think any of us in a sound mind want to make reckless decisions in this world. And so he comes out, he says, be very careful how you live. This word careful can be translated as the word diligently, which just means to show care and conscientiousness for one's work. So, of course we would want to do that. Of course I would want the things that I decide to do to be defined by that. And it's an obvious statement, and it seems like, yeah, that's something I want, but why is it actually so hard to do? Why is it actually so hard to make sure that everything I do is backed by wisdom? Harrison is really into building forts recently. If we're ever at your house and there are blankets in sight, watch out, because if a fort can't be built, it will be built. He's obsessed with building forts. So we had to start laying some fort ground rules in the Newell household. Fort 101. And first rule is don't build it in mom and dad's bedroom, okay? Because like day one, it was something, and then he had like a castle, and I'm like, get out. So now he's building forts in his bedroom. That is where he's allowed to build forts. And I started having to go over some basic principles and really specifics with him. Like if you're gonna have a blanket that's resting over the edge of your dresser, do not hold it up by the piggy bank, because when he tugs on that blanket, it's coming down and Piggy ain't gonna survive the fall, okay? Had to teach him that. Had to teach him you can't hang the blanket on top of a light fixture. I had to teach him, he has a loft bed, and so he has these steps that go up to the loft bed. I had to teach him you can't cover up your steps with the blanket because then you can't get to the top. And I'm giving him these really specific examples, but I was boiling it down to like some basic fort building 101, okay? And I had a little bit of an out-of-body experience. I don't know if you've had this happen. Because I'm talking to my son about how to build a fort, and I feel like I was like not in my own body just watching myself say these things to him. And I came up with, I think, some pretty good rules, okay? I said, first, thank you, I'm going to tell you what they are. I said, first, plan it out. 2, is it safe? And 3, ask your dad. Those were the rules. First, plan it out. 2, is it safe? 3, ask your dad. And the reason I had an out-of-body experience, this was just this week. I had this out-of-body experience because I'm thinking, man, isn't that maybe the best thing I could tell you as a preacher today? For whatever you got going on right now, if we just spent a little bit more time planning it out, a little bit of time asking, is it safe or right? And a little bit of time going to our Heavenly Father and asking Him if I should actually do this thing. I feel like that is the most basic practical advice I could stand up here and tell you. And I'm saying this is applying to building a fort, but I feel like this is the same way on how to live our lives. And why is this a problem? Because in fort building, he wants to do the thing that makes the most sense right in the moment, the thing that he thinks is the coolest, the thing that he thinks will make him happy right now. But isn't that how we typically make our decisions? We make our decisions so reactive. What do I want in the moment? What do I want right now? What will make me happy right now? And to live carefully will require you to break the cycle of reactive decision making. And there will be things, don't get me wrong, there will be things that come across your plate every single day where you have to make a reactive decision. But my hope is in those moments that you've spent enough time with Jesus, you've spent enough time pursuing Him and His kingdom and His righteousness, that whenever the reactive decisions come, you are best positioned to make that reactive decision. The problem is for a lot of us is we tend not to plan things out. We tend not to ask, is it safe? We tend, a lot of times, we don't go to our Heavenly Father with questions about how we should handle circumstances. And we end up in situations that require a reactive response far more often than we should. And we end up in this place, and I want to tell you today that instead of living reactively, I believe God tells us to live proactively. And I believe this can get into the most granular parts of your life, because to live proactively means you're going to live intentionally. It means you're going to make decisions on purpose and for a purpose. You're going to live by design. But to live reactively means it's unintentional. It means that I did not plan this out. And I believe you're kind of just going through life on autopilot, or as I said, maybe living life by default. Do I want this right now? Does it feel good right now? And we tend to make those types of decisions. Super practically, if I'm living life proactively, it means I'm going to lay out my gym clothes the night before instead of waiting until 6 a.m. to say, do I feel like going to the gym that day? Proactively, if you're married in the room, listen, proactively means I'm going to choose to love my spouse in the way that they best receive love instead of reactively choosing to love them in the way that I best receive love. There are differences to proactive decision-making and reactive decision-making. Proactive, super easy. I'm going to have a budget. I'm going to stick to it instead of reactive, spending whatever I want and then seeing what's left over at the end of the month. I know people in the room that they're proactive about their faith so much to the point that they will put their Bible reading or their time with God in their calendar. And they say, I'm going to actually hold this time and set this time aside, because the reactive way is to say, well, I'll just spend time with God whenever I feel like it. And far more often than we like, we don't make that decision nearly enough. See, if we're going to shift our perspective on how we choose to live our life, I really believe we'll end up making better choices. Why? Because we're going to plan it out. We're going to ask, is it safe? Another way to ask, is it safe, is it right? Right? Like, is this the right thing for me in the grand scheme of what God desires for me? And hopefully, we go ask our Heavenly Father. Because I talk to way too many people that when they come up against a problem or they come up a situation, when I get into a conversation with them, to find out that they have not gone to God and asked Him what He thinks about this situation. And we tend to treat prayer like a last resort, but it should be our first response. Like, prayer should be our first response in every scenario to say, God, what do you want me to do in this?